Bismillah, welcome everyone to the first class of Poetic Protest, reading the feminist poetry of Zhale, who is a lesser known poet, but that's a problem we hope to rectify with this class. She deserves to be known. She has some of the most interesting, intimate insights on life, not just as a woman, not just as an unhappy person, as a person with a protest about Iranian society, as you can see in the title, but just a human living in the Qajar era. We often look at Iranian history through the lens of, kings and battles and events and treaties and whatnot, and we'll even be guilty of that. We'll do a bit of that today, but we rarely look at the humans, the figures, whether they lived happily or suffered or however they may have lived, the human perspective on the past. So hopefully this will help rectify that situation. Can you ask you to send the dial in if you get a moment? Do you mean the invitation to the class? I'll go ahead and do that. Sure. Go ahead and do that for you all. And don't hesitate to ask if you need anything. So there's the invitation. And this is the invite link. Go ahead and feel free to send that. All right. So go ahead and start. First, I would like to apologize. This version of the advertisement that I'll be removing soon, hopefully, when there's an appropriate time for me to remove it and repost the advertisement. I'd like to apologize. This is a different Zhale, not our Zhale, but for some reason, this photo was on the Wikipedia of the poet that we're reading from. Now, after I posted this, some of her descendants or siblings' descendants, I think the person who messaged me said Zhale is her great-great aunt or something like that, or his great-great aunt, said that this is not her, this is a different Zhale, this is a big problem we have. And after I made the post, the Wikipedia removed the image. So hopefully my mistake led to some rectification. So we have scrubbed this from the website, but it's on the Instagram for now. Eventually, when sensitivities are kind of relaxed and it's more appropriate, we'll take this down and put the amended flyer. So I apologize to this other Zhale. And I should have known because she looks to be in her maybe 30s, and the type of fashion she's wearing makes it look like the photo is taken in the 20s or 30s.
Let's leave it.
So basically, it would apply to me that the photo is of someone who's much younger than the real Zhale, that we're not the real Zhale, but our Zhale, so to speak. So we will be taking this down. And that really does speak to the difficulties of trying to figure out how to present things, how to affirm photos. And unfortunately, with these lesser known people, it can be hard to know things for a fact. Now, the good news is that Zhale is not that old. She is only just a century ago. She does have living descendants and a living famous poet's son. So a lot of her life information is verifiable. It's close enough to us to know for a fact. Her husband was a public figure. Her family were known aristocrats. And it's close enough to us that we can actually look into things. And in her poetry, you do find a lot of hints of her life. So today we'll just do the introduction. Just a note, the classes are recorded. Your likeness is not in the class. Even if you speak, just your voice will be recorded. You don't have to attend them live. You're more than welcome. Time zones, busyness, I get it. It's Sunday afternoon, but I like it if people show up. It's always fun. And please try to mute yourselves until you're ready to ask a question or contribute or read a poem. Just helps with the recording quality. What is Persian Poetics? Maybe some of you are coming to us for the first time. We started in 2018 just as an Instagram page. In 2021, we became a course platform. We're based here in Manhattan in New York City. And we have on Mondays Persian classes and on Wednesdays Rumi nights here. So you're more than welcome. But also if you're here, hopefully likely to join us. And I should remove this because since I've used this template, it's not forthcoming. We do have a book called The Flame of Love. So it's a translation of Rumi poems, and it's available wherever books are available. Hope to see you guys here in class and we can give you a copy in person. It's available on Amazon as well. And these are Rumi's poems, not the ones we're reading in this class. Welcome to the website. So maybe you've seen the Instagram page before only, and now you're on the website for the first time. To enter this class, you became an all-access member with a free trial. So when you joined, you didn't pay anything. The check-in page said 0, and that will give you 30 days of free access to the website and all of the courses that are pre-recorded, not just this one, but all the other ones, and also the classes that meet continuously via Zoom. So when you joined, you got an email. Those are Zoom links. They're stable. Feel free to come to the classes. And if you forget to cancel, there is a membership fee. But don't worry, because we have another 30-day grace period, or if you just email us, we'll refund that first membership fee. I know we all forget to do things like that. So there is a grace period. So if you add it all up, you get 60 days of access to the website. But you don't need that. You can actually just go cancel it right now if you'd like, because this Zoom link is stable. It will not change. You could just show up to the Zoom classes. And that's even better because we get to see each other and know each other, as opposed to the recordings, which is not as fun, at least for me. So anyway, you're a member of the website. Glad to have you on there. There's a community where you can ask questions. You can email me. There's Persian language learning materials. There are classes that are like this that are focused on content. There's other feminist poetry classes or poetess-oriented classes, female poets. So if you are interested in this class, you'll sure to be interested in that. And this is kind of a preview. Maybe I should update this. These are old classes now. We have much newer classes. But it gives you a vision into an image into the type of classes we offer. All right, please mute yourselves, guys, because someone keeps unmuting themselves. All right. So my name is Muhammad Ali Mojarradi. I'm an Iranian American. That's how I know Persian, and I'm interested in the language and the culture. And I was raised between Iran and America, although it's very lopsided in favor of America. I only spent a little bit in Iran. Excuse me. All right. I only spent a little bit of time in Iran, a few years here and there in high school years, and a few years as an adult years, but I did go back and study quite a bit, so I hope I can say I'm conversant in the literature tradition and the language. I did study economics and Middle Eastern studies at the University of Michigan, so I have a little bit of social science or STEM related stuff up my belt, or up my sleeve as well. Although I haven't really made much use of it, maybe occasionally it'll be relevant. I did study Arabic in Jordan, and I lived between these countries that you see here. So I have a little bit of experience in the region, hopefully, and with language. We won't read as much Arabic and Zhale's poetry because they're more personal reflections, and classes like Rumi Hafiz, some of you here from those classes, you'll know we do read Arabic quite a bit. But in this instance, we will be mostly reading Persian with a few Arabic phrases maybe here and there. This is my website. If you'd like to find more about me, to see podcasts where I've rambled on about who I am or where I'm from or whatever, if you just look up Shahrzadeh, which is just my online handle, .com, it'll come up, and you can just click the find my book or go on the podcast and see what I'm all about. I hope not to make this class about me. I'm happy at the end after I finish recording to answer personal questions if you're just curious, but a lot of it's already explained there. All right, a few disclaimers before we start, especially with a class like this. So this quote is one of my favorites. The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. The past is more different than you imagine it to be. Now, the good news is this book is not from so far into the past. We're dealing with someone from the late 1800s, early 1900s. So it is plausible that someone who's on this call right now could have been alive while this poet was alive. And it's not even a far-fetched, right? She died in 1946, I believe. So it's very plausible. My grandparents, who recently passed away, but they were both alive when she was alive. So it's not that ancient. Maybe that one applies more to other classes, but it bears remembering that Iran was not a modernized country 100 years ago. So it is maybe more foreign than America would have been at that time. Another thing is that to read a poem is not an endorsement of all of its content, not even close. We're reading these things to understand the past, to appreciate the past, to learn from the past, but not to say that we like what is in the poem or what happened then. It's very important to remember. We're not necessarily endorsing all points of view. Zhale, like Rumi, like Hafiz, like Sadi, like all the other poets we read in class, has very particular, even pointed, even harsh points of view. She had a very particular, difficult life. We're not saying that everything she says is true blanket or is applicable to everyone in Iran at all times, or even then. We're just appreciating it for what it is, which is the reflections of one lady from one particular time and place. And we welcome everyone's viewpoints. Obviously, a class that's advertised as a feminist poetry class will lean in a certain direction. That's totally fine. And if you don't lean in that direction, that's totally fine. We always have a few ladies usually who come who don't identify necessarily as feminists. And you're not discluded. It's just an advertising thing. We're just reading poems. And if you're not a feminist, that's fine. If you're a feminist, that's fine. If you think that Zhale is not feminist enough, that's also fine. It's very valid. She's over 100 years ago. We hope to not judge anyone. We're all welcome as long as everyone's respectful. We're not really going to read these poems with the point of view of, picking them apart in terms of if we agree or not, just hopefully to appreciate, to learn from the past, to, appreciate their emotions and learn about our ancestors if we're Iranian or from the region. We hope not to draw any broad conclusions. We can't say for any point in time that everyone was oppressed or that everyone was okay or that Islam is totally oppressive or totally not oppressive. We're not here to draw broad conclusions. We're not here to get into these culture wars as much as maybe in other places I'm happy to get into them. We're just here to, provide a welcome environment to appreciate literature. And please avoid passing judgments. Please don't say, oh, we were like this and then this happened, or Muslims are like this or not like this. We can just, hopefully speak with a bit more nuance, right? We're here to appreciate literature, not on like a social media comments debate. All right. Yeah, exactly. It's her point of view. And there's a beautiful Sufi poet from Yemen, and I grew up with Yemenis in Michigan and here in New York as well. خذ ما سفع ودع الكدر. Take pure water and leave the muddy. So if you open Zhale's work, and I have her divan here, if you open Zhale's work and you see this poem and one line of it is beautiful and one line of it is ugly, that's fine. Love the beautiful one and ignore the ugly one. So all poets this applies, even Rumi, as much as I love him. So what are the objectives? What can we hopefully do by the end of this class? Why should you stick through for 10 sessions with me? One is to study her perspective. She's a fascinating person, I think, in her own right, deserving of being understood. And to understand the perspective of her cohort of Iranian women in the 19th and 20th centuries. Now, of course, she's not a nomadic woman. She's not a rice farmer in the north. She's not a Bazari's wife in central Iran, or she's not an Isfahani Armenian or Jewish lady. She's from a kind of a secular Muslim persuasion, from a particular like middle upper class, like middle of the aristocracy. So not high aristocrat, not low, like in the middle, but still she speaks for a large cohort of people who were involved in instigating the women's movement in Iran. That's very important. It was not the highest of the elites and not the lowest, like the middle elites who were maybe westernized enough to understand what was going on in the West, but not cushy enough to have a fully free life. They would have been people who maybe in Iran today are like a female doctor. Like her predecessor is a type of person who started, or not her predecessor, she is the one who's kind of helped instigate the women's movement in Iran. And again, maybe I'm reiterating here. I went off the script on the last slide. We'll hopefully not endlessly litigate. I know there's like a tendency to go in this direction, and I'm interested too. But sometimes we just have to let things be, let disagreements be, and it is what it is. And hopefully no one will be unproductive. No one will argue. Everyone will just, I know the group is more intimate. In other poetess classes, there's been more people. So there's been more debates and whatnot. But I think with the intimate group, we'll all become friends, inshallah. All right. A few small notes, nerdy notes maybe. You only care if you're a nerd like me. About transliteration. This is a transliteration scheme. If you're used to Pinglish or Persian written in Latin characters, I know a lot of Iranian Americans write this way. I do as well. We don't write this way when we're texting our cousins or our parents, right? But this is a very particular method that people in academia use just for the sake of simplicity and correspondence, or equivalency, and kind of having a standard, so to speak. So if you're interested, you can pause it or go back, watch the recording, screenshot this, and learn the system. If not, that's fine. It's not so necessary. You will hear me read the Persian anyway. And a small note, I know at least one of us is in here from a different class and knows Arabic, but I know that you know this. But anyone watching in the future or who joins us in the next weeks who is in Arab, just know that we pronounce words that are written in Arabic and Arabic in origin in a particular Persian way, just like we don't say croissant, and when we speak English, we say croissant. We do the same thing in Persian. So no one says Hafiz, Attar, Sa'adi, Hadith, Muhammad. We say Hafiz, Attar, Sa'adi, Hadith, Muhammad. So again, if you speak Arabic, that's fine. You can keep saying it that way, but just know that we will say it in this way and that it's correct, quote unquote. All right, so let's first talk about Zhale's world. And I think many of us don't appreciate what life was like then when she was around living her life, whether we're Western, because maybe we're not conversant with a different civilization's trajectory, which is totally normal, or even if we're Iranian for that matter. A lot of Iranians, I think, we view the early modern period of Iran as a point of shame, like Iran's quote-unquote center of humiliation, or maybe the beginning of it. And for that reason, a lot of us don't like to talk about the way Iran was. Even in the early Pahlavi era, there was a lot of problems in Iran that people are uncomfortable to talk about, like the poverty. For example, my dad says, this family, that family, our family, we didn't have water, we didn't have power. And when you talk to them, they deny it or they're very uncomfortable. Similarly, I think I kind of got a lens into this. I should say, similarly, we don't talk about how messed up Iran used to be, or it still is in a way, unfortunately, but especially then, because it's uncomfortable and it hurts our national pride. I got this window a bit because whenever we'd visit Iran or when I would live in Iran, I would always bug my dad and say, well, why did we leave? Or why is this country like this? And why isn't it like America? And so my dad over the years would go into the problems Iran has, social, political, cultural, and he would kind of illuminate what life used to be like. Because my dad had me when he was a little bit older, and he grew up with his own grandfather who was around in the era where Zhale was writing. And he told him about what life was like then. So I kind of sometimes even spoil Iranians' point of view about what Iran was like when I mention to them how, quote unquote, messed up, I hate to say it, Iran used to be over 100 years ago, like many global South countries. Because again, we have this romantic view of, there was a monarchy. And whenever there's a monarchy, Iran is okay, right? It's not so simple. So let's look at her world. I think the best way to do it is just simply watch a video. This is one of the only videos taken of normal street life in a time when Zhale was alive. So what you're seeing now is a look into her world when she stepped out into the street. And this is what she would have looked like when she went out in the street. So I want you to pretend you're Zhale going shopping in the bazaar in Isfahan. This happens to be, or Tehran or Arak or wherever. They would have looked similar to each other. And just look at her world. And what I want you guys to do is kind of keep notes and tell me at the end if anything about what you see shocked you. Okay, I want you guys to notice this scene right here is the closest look you'll get to someone like Zhale. You can tell this man, he's cleaner, he has nicer clothes on, he's a bit richer. And this is a rich man's wife. So it's kind of backwards now because now we associate wearing a face veil with kind of being less educated or less financially well off in our part of the world, like Iran, Afghanistan, although Afghanistan's different now. But in Iran, let's just say, whereas back then it was the opposite, where the richer women were more veiled. Exactly, Khanum or Begum, as someone said in the comments. Whereas women who were working class or tribal or just the poor, frankly, I hate to say it, not to mince words, be honest about it, the poor were able to show their faces. So you kind of have this reverse image of what you would think the reality would be.
I know
Go
the
ahead.
the Romans or the Greeks, their high class women used to cover their face because they didn't want any sun damage.
Yeah. So
Yeah, so
this is a very true point that in like even Arabia at the time, one of the reasons that Muslim women were asked to cover, it's theorized from a secular perspective, obviously from a religious perspective, you say modesty, but is that noble women would cover their hair. It was a sign of nobility to be covered. So these are maybe like minor elites. And then there's another image, there's another moment where you see a group of normal looking women who you can even see their hair. I mean, they're wearing a chador, but it's kind of like the loose grandma villager chador look where you can kind of basically still see their hair. So this is a noble woman, but see, these are normal women here. You can see their hair. I mean, it's kind of like a loose chador look you see in Iran and Pakistan still. So this is what more normal women would have looked like. And the more, middle class, bazaar, et cetera, women. And you see child labor here, right? Kids working, I don't know, farming, taking goods. And there's a very good point that not all people could afford the expensive cloth for veils, the linens, and silks. All right. So I want you guys' insights, and you can feel free to take a turn or unmute yourselves. Type it. What about that surprised you? What about that seemed normal to you? I think a lot of Iranians, when they see a video like that, they're kind of taken aback by what life was like in Iran. Mind you, this isn't even 100 years ago. There are people alive in Iran today who lived then. This is 99 years ago. Did anything about that shock you or surprise you about the image of life? I would say Iranians are utterly shocked. I mean, my wife's grandfather moved to New York City in this era. She's descended from one of like the earliest Iranian American families. And he said he described moving from Iran then in like the 20s to New York as moving from the year 1200 to the year 1900 basically. He felt like Iran looked like it had looked 1,000, 2,000, or whatever, many hundreds of years ago, that every building was made out of mud and it was only 1 or 2 stories and all the women had their face covered and whatnot. And then you come to New York and you see like Brooklyn Bridge and skyscrapers. And that was kind of we'll talk about this modernization campaign that instigated a modernization campaign that Zhale actually lived through. And she mentions as in a poem we'll read at the end of this class. So we'll go through a small slideshow. I know that video is not the highest quality to give a view of what women's lives looked like back then. So we have some ladies. They have this. So the white fabric you saw covering the face, they were able to somehow like undo it or move it aside. So they want their face to be recorded in the image. But you saw the women otherwise had their faces covered. Here you see Western depictions. This left one looks like a photograph of some sort, but not a photograph. But the right one is just a drawing of the same thing, basically.
ببخشید استاد, please correct me because this is the first time I'm
Sure.
looking at these, right? From what I see is that the white one is the veil, but
Yeah.
it is able to be turned on the
Exactly.
side,
You
flipped,
could
yeah?
turn it. So it's kind of
Yeah.
like the burqa. It's like one whole thing. This is more like just a normal chador that we still have in Iran versus that white part was like a triangle shaped fabric. You'll see more images of it
I've
that you
seen
could actually
similar
turn.
ones
Yeah.
in the Bohra community of India and Pakistan.
They do
wear
have
those.
stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
These stuff persists. And someone says, not to be honest, not really. This was before Reza Shah's modernization. That's a good point. Yeah. Iranians are broadly probably aware of that then.
But yes, in this image, is that the way that she's covering her face, is this with the chador?
It's with the chador. So Iranian women
And
still
it's
do this, by the
voluntarily
way.
done.
Very old women do this. So they stick their hand like in the fabric and then they push it across their face like this to cover. Even in COVID, I would see some not old women doing that. But it's more associated with like more of a grandma look. Like if a grandma's embarrassed to be seen. So you see here the lady is doing the same thing. The white niqab is removable. I was wondering why their face veils are white. I think it's just linen. It's easier. You see this lady, she's holding a cat inside of her chador. I love these images of the past. I adore looking into what our ancestors' lives were like. Gorba, exactly. And this is an image of Zoroastrian women, believe it or not, for all those Iranians who think that Zoroastrians were the feminists and that Muslims were the non-feminists. Veiling is a universal Near Eastern practice. If you look at all religions, there's also pictures of Armenians that I didn't include, but because they were just geographically more distant. But these are more from the world that Zhale lived in. But there were all photos of Armenians with hijab, Jews with hijab, etc. Yeah, the fabric and the clothing, I mean, politics of veiling aside, is very beautiful and nicely done. This is a zoom in of a lady. Again, she moved her niqab over so that you could see her face. This is the niqab. But then she's still covering her mouth because she has to be 50% modest. All right. And this is two ladies at ease, sitting in their kursi, their heated chair. Maybe Zhale would have sat around in her home in such a look.
And these are rich women, right?
They were, yeah. These are wealthy people we're looking at. This is a scene that looks like the bazaar we just saw, random dudes. Notice how there's no pavement, there's no sign of modernity at all. Like the life is really in full continuity with medieval life here. So this is the world that Zhale was raised. You see a lady here, she's covering her face. Very simple, very poor, materially difficult life. So here we have women who are musicians. Notice their faces are not covered here. And women who were in these types of subcultures generally had a higher degree of social freedom. And you notice this guy has a dagger here. And then here I find this interesting. You see two European women, and it says Dr. Mirza Ahmed. It's like two important people, Khalkhali, so from the city of Khalkhal in Azerbaijan, which was close to Russia, which is where modernity came from. And you see two European women with what appears to be like a Caucasian man or maybe an Iranian dressing European clothing. But these two women are almost certainly white women. And you see that people like Zhale would have had a chance to look at people like that and say, wow, look, that's the type of life they have. They can appear in photos with men. They can have their face uncovered. They have social and political freedoms, and they have this ability to move around in society that I just simply don't. This is an image of women from that era. And this is a hijab style that emerged in the late Qajar time. So maybe this is the 20th century already. Different color, but same vibe. Now, again, if you guys wanted the recording, you can go back and pause, but I'll just go through quickly for this interest of time. Now, another thing to situate yourselves in Qajar, Iran, and understand the moment in time that Zhale is in and the references she makes and her ideas about her culture, her people, her past, etc., is, how was Iran? What did it look like? What type of world were they living in? Where was Iran with respect to its own history? So we'll also, just the same way we did 10 minutes of what her life looked like, we'll do 10 minutes of a short history of Iran. And to all my dear Iranians, I apologize because I know that we would love to go into more length. So this is a basic overview of the look of Iran's history in terms of dynasties. So everything from before the Rashidun Caliphate was the pre-Islamic era. This is post-Islamic, but they didn't really take control of Iran until this kind of end part of it. So from here, when the Sassanids end onward, Iran is ruled by dynasties that profess Islam, at least in name. So they're not like Islamic full stop. They're at least in name by Muslims, even the Pahlavis, right? And then before, we have various pre-Islamic empires, but the Achaemenid Empire is kind of where Persians think of as their history beginning. And this is why the Shah made the calendar 2,500 some years, and he had the 2,500 year celebration, because we view ourselves as having about that much history, or at least in that time. This is a more zoomed in look of all the dynasties that are named more properly with all the sub-dynasties. Again, if you'd like, you can pause it and study this from basically until the modern era. They didn't put the Islamic Republic here, but it starts after the Pahlavis, which would be around here. So Pahlavis, Islamic Republic. But basically, all the dynasties that had their hand in ruling or misruling, honestly, Iran in the last few thousand years, going back all the way to the Achaemenid Empire. So let's talk a bit about Iran before Islam. Mazyar Jobrani, Maz Jobrani, the comedian, had a great line. We had an empire, which is how many Iranians like to just summarize what Iran's history was before Islam. Unfortunately, most of our understanding comes from the Shahnameh, which is semi-historical, semi-fictional, more fictional as it relates to the earlier stuff, which is what we're interested in. It's important to know that Iran was conquered by Alexander the Great, or the Macedonian, as Iranians would have me call him, not the Great, because he's our enemy, supposedly, and Hellenized. We do have some of that influence. And it is broadly true that we were a Zoroastrian kind of entity, although we have many other Iranian religions, Mazdakism and Mazdaism and Manichaeism and Mithraism, among others, and non-Iranic minorities who had different varying degrees of religious freedom at different times, Jews, Christians, and Buddhists, mostly Buddhists being in the northeast, Jews coming kind of from the west near Iraq, Christians being dispersed, but the Iranian empires were always at war with Christian Rome, so Christians had varying degrees of freedom in Iran. So there's really not much to say about this era that really relates to this class, unfortunately, because most of what forms Iran's consciousness today, and especially the world Zhale was living in, was the Iran's experience post-Islam. And this is what colors a lot of our culture wars or political debates about what Iranian identity should even look like. So Iranians have these empires that are broadly Zoroastrian, broadly Persian empires, even though they had different liturgical languages and all kinds of ethnicities. But it's not important. We can say Persian, Zoroastrian empires broadly. And then Islam emerges in the southwest, southwest of Iran, not in the southwest of Iran, but southwest of us in the Arabian Peninsula. And what once were kind of a neighbor, a vassal state, we had the Lakhmeds and all kinds of satrapies, Arab vassals, all of a sudden conquer us. So it would be comparable to maybe, I don't know, Puerto Rico conquering America, like something on that scale, as unimaginable as that. And Iran does get fully conquered in the time of like the third and fourth caliphs. And the rightly guided caliph era quickly ends, unfortunately, and it goes to the Umayyads, who had a bit of an Arab supremacist element, where they did suppress Iranian culture and language and non-Arab Muslims broadly, but that reached to a boiling point. And notice I said non-Arab Muslims, because even though Iranians converted, they still were not getting the promised benefits of being Muslims. So that reaches a boiling point and culminates in the Abbasid Revolution, where the Abbasids take over the Umayyads, and the Abbasids, in so many ways, you could say, are almost like a spiritual continuation of Persia. And this is where I kind of disagree with a lot of my fellow Iranians. I say that, fair enough, you can disagree with Islam, but don't forget that Islam, in many ways, became an Iranian project shortly after this Umayyad suppression era, which lasted like about a century, ended. So the Abbasids, they choose their caliphate capital to be Baghdad. Notice where Baghdad's very close to. Oh, it's close to the capital of the Sassanid Empire. Isn't that funny? Isn't that just a coincidence? It would be like if Puerto Rico invaded America and then made the new Puerto Rican capital Baltimore instead of Washington, D.C., And then they just replaced the American government with, and just put it back, but in Baltimore, and just kept all the same people and the same ideas and the same notions, right? So it's not like a full kind of break. It's like a different mask of the same thing in many ways. So you have Tal Kesra and Sestefan, or Tisfun, as we call it, and that was the historical empire capital for a long time. And oops, it's right next to Baghdad, just a little upriver. And if you look at the name of Baghdad, which is founded by the Abbasids after the Abbasid Revolution with the help of the Persians, it was founded by Persians, and oh, look, it has a Persian name. And oh, look, Baghdad happens to look exactly like other Sassanid cities that were made by Sassanid Persians. Isn't that interesting? So you guys get where I'm going with this. This is a point that unfortunately is not really well explained to Iranians, or not well understood among Iranians. So this revolt leads to basically de facto Persian independence. So it is true that Iranians are like de jure in law under the rule of the Abbasids. They are de facto, or in fact, independent. So outside of the center, the core of Baghdad and areas radiating directly out from it, the Abbasids didn't really have that much say. I mean, when you get farther and farther away before modernity, it's kind of hard to know what's even going on out there. So what happened is the Samanid, Tahrid, and Safarid courts, which were all like northeast of modern Iran, basically, or in the northeast of modern Iran, among other countries like, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, these courts and dynasties, these petty small dynasties, spring up and they patronize the Persian language again. So after what we call Do Qarn Sukut in Persian, 2 centuries of silence, Persian goes from being a language only used in spoken context and not written or in a court or in any formal setting outside of maybe Zoroastrian religious purposes, is brought back as a court language, and what we call New Persian is made. When we say new, we don't mean it's from like 10 or 20 years ago. We mean not Middle Persian, which was Sassanid before, and not Old, which is a long time ago. So New Persian emerges, and it's Arabized. It has Arabic vocabulary and Arabic script, but back then, scripts were more associated with religious identity than ethnic identity. So Jews, no matter where they were, wrote their languages using the Hebrew script. Similarly, Persians, but also Muslims in China, in Southeast Asia, in Africa, in Europe, wrote Slavic languages, Russian, Chinese, all these languages in the Arabic script. So this was the reason Arabic was used. It was just the script of Muslims, and it is what it is. And the Persian that we know today and is essentially formed in that era, and there's a ton of continuity in the language. Can someone explain the point, please? What did you mean exactly? I'd be happy to, hopefully. So in the post-Abbasid era, we find that minus these Mongol conquerings that happened to us, Iran has just a bunch of little short-lived dynasties that rule over Iran. So there isn't ever a moment where, like, for example, the Sassanids, just a dynasty, or like, for example, the Safavids, just rules over Iran for hundreds of years. And it's important to know these are Persianate, or in the area, so like the Mughals were never in Iran. Imperial Russia was never in Iran. It's like related or neighboring, so like Doranis are in Afghanistan. But you'll notice that in terms of people that ruled Iran, it was basically the Safavids who ruled a large swath of Iran for a long time. The Muzaffarids didn't rule all of Iran, and neither did all of these people mostly. The Timurids did. But it's important to know that we never had a moment in time where all of Iran was unified and ruled by one person and it prospered, other than basically the Safavids and a few moments here and there in the Seljuks for all of Iran's history. Just dynasty after dynasty rules for a few centuries and then gets kicked out, and rules for a few centuries and gets kicked out. This basically produces a lot of the instability of Iran. And it also is why I problematized the concept of 2,500 years of monarchy. That's only true if you think of it as like very broad thing, like, okay, we have had monarchy for that long, but there hasn't been 1 or 2 or 3 or like 10 monarchies even. There have been like dozens of individual monarchies that ruled Iran, and at the same time. So like in this era where Hafiz lived, the Muzaffarids, Injuid, Jalayirids, and Chupanids, they all 4 of them ruled Iran at once, different sections of Iran, and then the Timurids came and wiped them all away. So we're looking at an Iran where it's unstable, where it's constantly shifting hands, where every 50 years a new invasion comes and kills a bunch of people and rules. And if you're wondering why Iranians are distrustful of outsiders, ajnabi, foreigner is a bad word for us, and we're very pessimistic and we're very depressive about Iran's future, you're looking at the reason, basically. So Iran gets some breathing room of independence, and then in like the 11, 12, 1300s, Turks and Mongols, people from the Central Asian steppe, descend inward, and they basically conquer Iran. The Turks were nicer than the Mongols. We don't have to get into the details. I mean, these are kind of well-known historical trends. But then Iran from then on basically is ruled by Turkic people, and that was true for Zhale's life. The Qajars were Turks. Reza Shah was half Turkic. His son, Mohammad Reza Shah, was 3/4 Turk. The Safavids were Turk. Ali Khamenei today is Turk. Maybe Turks don't love to claim him, but he's a Turkic person. There's videos of him speaking Turkish. So Iran has basically only been ruled by Turks, except Khomeini, who was like Kashmiri Iranian in the Zand dynasty. I think other than them, basically everyone who ruled Iran from then on is a Turkic person. So I said that there was a lot of nonsense, basically, except the Safavids. Not to be partisan, I don't love them for any particular reason, just stating the facts that they were the only empire that managed to unite Iran, conquer the whole landmass, rule it for an extended period of time, and bring in a new era of prosperity. And they did create the modern Iranian identity. So a lot of Iranians are a bit overzealous, and they say, oh, Iran's like thousands of years old or whatever. It is in a sense. But what we know as modern Iran, I would argue, can be traced to this 1501 moment, which still makes it very old by modern standards, right? Like Italy is 2 centuries old, America is 2 centuries old. You know, a lot of modern countries are only 2 centuries old. Iran, in the modern sense, is 500 plus years old. The borders of Iran today, the architecture, the music, the culture, the religion, all of what we know of as Iran today, all of it is broad here, but most of it comes from, or at least can be traced to, this kind of turning point in history, Iran's conversion to Shiism, consolidation under Shah Ismail, and it represents one of the only times Iran was ruled by native Iranic people. So the Safavids are Turkic culturally. They do speak Turkish as like their native language, but they are actually kind of a Kurd or Iranic people from the northwest of Iran who are just linguistically Turkicized. But Shah Ismail comes from like a Sufi, Sunni, Kurdish background or something like that. So they were kind of native ethnically in a way that the previous Turkic empires were not. They were just very foreign in many ways. So they bring about the golden era. I hate to say it, but everything nice about Iran that is not ancient is traceable to the Safavids. I think Isfahan is the nicest Iranic city in the world. I haven't been to Samarkand and Bukhara, so I'll suspend judgment for them. But in terms of what I've seen, not just in terms of what is there from the past, but in terms of modern life, urbanism, amenities, walkability, urban planning, like all this stuff, Isfahan is just a gem. And I think this is the nicest square in the world. I mean, I hate the biggest game. People say, oh, the Tiananmen Square is the biggest square. Okay, it's like a bit too huge, that one. This is the nicest square in the world, in my opinion. It's better than whatever we have here in terms of Times Square or whatever squares exist. So I think the Nakhsha Jahan Square, the Shah Square, the Imam Square, whatever you want to call it, don't care. Shah Square, as it was called, is the nicest square in the world. It has the nicest mosque in the world, Lotfullah. It has a palace. I won't say the nicest palace, but it has the Adi Ghapu Palace. It has a beautiful bazaar. Salam az Bukhara. I'm so glad to hear that. When you just look at Isfahan, it's a gem of Persianate society. And in that time, Europe was a dump in the 1500s. And successive waves of Europeans would visit. And they kind of started the European Persianate Orientalist tradition. They started visiting. They took back tulips. They took back high heels. They took back scarves and shawls. Those words, shawl is Persian. They took back khaki pants and all kinds of innovations that Persians were cooking up at the time. So if you look at tulips in the Netherlands and shawls and fashion, all that came from us, and particularly Safavid culture. So this is where you see actually a lot of culture germinating, bubbling up. There's a phrase, Isfahan Nisfa Jahan, Isfahan's half the world, because you would go to Isfahan and you would see what we have today in New York. You saw actual cosmopolitanism. Isfahan had a Chinese, an Indian, and a Armenian, a Jewish, an Arab quarter. They had ethnic quarters from all over the world. So a European would come and just see all these people working on artisan things and whatnot, developing. And while Europe, didn't have much of anything going for it, with, all due respect to our dear European friends. Again, Isfahan is the gem of Iran. And I would say the best that's happened in Iran was from 1501 to the late 1700s. Since then, we've just been struggling to negotiate the modern reality. So I would recommend, inshallah, one day when Iran's chilled out and the visa situation's chilled out, we can all go and see Isfahan again. Such a lovely place. So the Safavids collapsed. They're actually invaded by the Hotek dynasty from Afghanistan, were ruled by Afghans. Again, more foreign rule for like 70 years. And then the Zand dynasty comes, Afshar dynasty comes, a few dynasties, and the Qajars consolidate Iran again. And they merge what's left of Iran into its modern borders. And a lot of what we think of as modern Iran, like Western influence, Tehran being the capital, the borders themselves, how Iran's constituted, many things are also crystallized in this Qajar era. Unfortunately, we see what became a lion turn into a cat. I get Iran Shirud Gorbashad, as we say in Persian. The last territorial concessions happened during the Qajar era. People really give them too much hate. It's not like they wanted to do it. Their hand was forced. They were weak, the same way that when the Safavids got invaded by the Afghans, we lost Afghanistan, which used to be part of Safavid Iran. And when the Ottomans attacked Iraq, we lost Iraq. And when the Russians attacked the Caucasus and the northeastern part of Iran, we lost that as well, and it became part of the USSR, and history is history. So it is what it is. Unfortunately, Qajar Iran did contract to these borders, and you'll notice they're basically Iran's natural borders of mountains. So Iran has historically always been this landmass, and that's what I tell my fellow Iranians who are worried about the issue of like territorial disintegration, which is this boogeyman they hang over our head to avoid changing anything. Oh, we'll disintegrate. Iran's polity is Lindy. Like, these are borders that are ancient. They've been there so long. There's no way it's going to retract past this. I mean, this is like you're looking from above and you can see the damn borders. My parents were born in Isfahan, and it's so nice to hear some new facts about it. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Welcome to Isfahanis with their beautiful accents as well. Was Bukhara and Samarkand seen as Uzbek territories during the Safavid era? I think they were in kind of flux at the time. I'm not exactly sure about. I know that we lost it, I think, before then, even that they were governing themselves. I think they haven't been part of Iran's contiguous landmass since like the 1300s. So Tajiks are an Iranic people, but they are distinct. Yeah, I think some of us Iranians are a little overzealous and like saying everyone's one of us. You know, they are distinct. So Qajar Iran, unfortunately, is just a barely held together group of statelets, which is reflected in their name, actually. They call themselves the Mamalik Mahrusei Iran, the guarded kingdoms of Iran, which is, again, this eternal primordial anxiety of Iran further disintegrating. And we were beaten and humiliated by the Russians, hence the losses. We were forced into unfair deals, hence the 1953 oil nationalization by Mossadegh and the subsequent coup. Hence the spheres of influence, Russia controlling our north and Britain controlling our south. Qajar Iran was just hanging on by the skin of its teeth, I think is the word, by the grit of its teeth. And the fact that we weren't even just outright colonized speaks to their ability to play the Russians and the British against each other. If not, we would have just been colonized. And who knows if we would have been consolidated as a country even. We could have gotten the India-Pakistan treatment for all we know. And I would say the central humiliation isn't just China's, it's also Iran's, as sad as that is to say. But we should be sober about Iran's situation. Hopeful, but also sober. Then there's a glimmer of hope. Reza Shah, who was then a Khan, which is just a military type of title. I don't know why a lot of people think I hate him. I think they just see that I wear traditional clothes and that I'm a Muslim or whatever. Like, they assume I would hate him. But I don't hate him. Actually, I think there's a lot to admire about his establishment of modern Iran. Someone said it was before Reza Shah's modernization. That video, I think, was taken right before his modernization campaign really changed what Iran looked like. And he basically is an enterprising general who does a coup, very normal story in terms of how kingship starts in Iran, and then he becomes the king. And he calls himself Pahlavi, linking himself to pre-Islamic Iran. That's actually his real last name, because there weren't last names. Reza Shah brought the idea of a last name for us. He was just born Reza, because normal people back then didn't have names or last names. They just had a first name. And then Khan was just a title because of his military experience. Maybe in his village he was called Reza, son of so-and-so, but the idea of a last name as we know it, that's passed down in perpetuity, is actually his idea for Iran. And he did do a badly needed, but unfortunately also poorly executed modernization campaign. A good way to think of this is that Ataturk was from Europe. He's from Greece, although it was Ottoman then, but from Greece, had lived in Western Europe and understood Europe intimately. Reza Shah only understood it superficially, which actually speaks to how Turkey successfully modernized itself and Iran only semi-successfully modernized itself. Turkey, for all of Ataturk's flaws, I think he conceptualized himself as a dictator so that Turkey would never need another dictator. He was a dictator, but he was hoping to salvage and create and cultivate a society where they could have a democracy. Whereas Reza Shah, for all of the good that he did, ultimately was a despot and envisioned Iran as a country ruled by despotism. He did not envision Iran as a democracy. Maybe you can say there's some political realism there that we're not meant for it or whatever. I won't get into those debates, but that is a difference in them. And ultimately, he was not fully successful, neither in modernizing nor in balancing the British, because they kicked him out and then they brought his son. And that brings the end of Zhale's life with Iran, because she died a few years after his son took power. Now I know we're running out of time. I'll try to be quick. We'll talk a bit about Zhale. It's all in a name, right? Or what's in a name, they say. Who knows? But Her name is very important, of course. What does Zhale mean? It means a dewdrop, and that's her pen name, although she doesn't use it as often as other poets because she doesn't consider herself a poet. These are more like diary entries, believe it or not. We'll see. Alam Taj, which is her name. Alam Taj means world crown or like crown of the world. Beautiful name, unfortunately out of use. Qa'im Maqami means she's descended from the Qa'im Maqam, which literally means the place stander in, or like a person who stands in place of another. But it's basically a fancy word for someone who has like a high rank in governance. And she has this name because she descends from Qa'im Maqam Farahani, which one of my ancestors in Iraq, or someone claims he's our ancestor. Who knows if he really is? Who knows how many descendants people have? He's a very famous Farahani guy from where I'm from Farahan. And he was a famous prime minister in Qajar, Iran. And he's also his descendant is Adib al-Mamalek, among other poets who are Zhale's cousins. So she comes from a very important, noble, and poetry-filled family. So you guys can read their works if you're so interested, although they're a bit niche. But in any case, she comes from noble descent, which is important to understand, not just as a factoid, but because it means she has access to education and wealth, and it really colors her worldview. So she is educated, which is extremely rare for women then. If you want, go watch the recording of the Poetess class. We talk about women's education at length, so I'll save you guys just repeating that all. But elite women at the time were educated, and I hate to say this is not my phrase that I came up with, but this is basically what it was. It was something like an MRS degree. So there's this joke in like 20th century America that basically, like, this looks like the initials for many degrees, like MD, MS, whatever, Master of Science, that 20th century American women, there was enough feminism to educate women, but not enough to give them careers. So what they would do is women would get educated for the purpose of being like an equal to their husband. So there was a joke that women were going to college to get their MRS degree, their Mrs. degree, like to just meet a good husband. And this is basically, although I hate to say it, why certain institutions like Barnard and Bryn Mawr and these basically women's colleges that are like equivalents to the Ivy, so Barnard is to Columbia as Bryn Mawr is to Penn, they were basically designed for the women like counterparts, like the sisters of the brothers at those schools, and they were supposed to marry each other eventually. And you'll notice even the women's colleges usually are built far away from the city. Barnard is an exception, but which at the time it was far from the city anyway. Barnard, like uptown where I live here in New York, would have been like rural back then anyway. But for example, Bryn Mawr is in like rural Pennsylvania, which is now suburban Philly, because they wanted the women to be away from like the riffraff of the cities. So there's something similar to that in Iran, where elite women were educated just for the purpose of basically having like a suitable spouse. Can we send the video links from this session into the chat or group chat? There's just one, but I'll send that for you. What was the literate percentage of Qajar, Iran? Maybe 5%. At best, I would guess. We don't know for sure, but probably 5%. So elite women were educated. Of course, there were no schools back then for everyone. It was all private tuition. So you just have someone come to you and teach you, or maybe a brother or father or something like that. We don't know for sure, but we can guess that she would have learned classical Arabic to understand the Quran. She would have read Arabic and Persian poetry. She would have basically done, whatever was a classical education in her life. It says in her biography that her son wrote she started at age 5. My guess is that she probably would have ended it at age 15, which is when her family's financial troubles happened, and they moved from Farahan to Tehran to seek better fortunes. And there is a specific nuance in Near Eastern cultures in marriage where you will often find that downwardly mobile, high-class people, again, they're downwardly mobile, will end up marrying people who are middle class but upwardly mobile. So they say you see the same people on your way up as you do on the way down. So people who have had centuries of wealth and class but are losing it, they're moving downward, and they're forced to marry people who now have money but are lacking in the class. So nouveau riche people have money but not the class or the standing, whereas downwardly mobile elites have the class but not the money. So these people will meet in the middle and marry each other. So this is why, for example, in Latin America, you will commonly find nouveau riche Middle Eastern immigrants marrying people from colonial Spanish families. This is a very common thing to see in Latin America. Or in America, it's very common to find WASPs who are not money rich today marry professionals from my type of background who are Middle Eastern, Indian, Chinese, etc. It's very common to see these types of matches. But one problem is, and I've seen it in my own family in Iran too. My grandmother came from a Bazari family. My grandfather's family was upwardly mobile, but not as educated or cultured, so to speak. The problem with these types of marriages is that it sometimes produces cultural incompatibilities between the spouses specifically. What was the literization trajectory of Iran? Reza Shah built the schools that made us literate. So in Qajar, Iran, it was not that common. In her age, in Zhale, in her old age, she would see those schools built. So Zhale is an example of this. Her family moves to Tehran because they have no longer a standing in Farahan. So her father is like a downwardly mobile elite, and he becomes friends with a guy, Ali Murad Khan Bakhtiyari, who is an upwardly mobile person, who is very wealthy but not cultured. He's like a military tribal leader, like a chieftain. So he has money but no brawn only. And he proposes that he marries his daughter, his friend's daughter, which is very normal at the time. So Zhale comes from a erudition class, standing, centuries of background. Look at her ancestor, plus going back further. And this guy is like some, meat-headed, I hate to say, God rest his soul, rest all of their souls, but like some mean kind of lowly villagery strongman type. God, I hate to say it, but rest in peace to everyone who's dead. I hate to talk about random dead guy who's not important from hundreds of years ago, but it is what it is. And so Zhale marries him. Now, we would think of it as a child marriage today. Then they wouldn't have thought of it as one. But you can think of it what you will. And then months later, her parents die. So imagine at age 15, because of financial trauma, your education stops. You move to Tehran. A few months later, you marry some old man that your dad met. And then a few months after that, both your parents die. Just imagine the type of discombobulation that would cause for any normal person. It would be beyond traumatizing. This is Burujerd, which is a town near where she's from. If I'm not mistaken, is it Burujerd? Oh, I thought it said Burujerd with all my glasses, but it says Javad. Anyway, it's what a small town that she would have lived in would have looked like at the time. Same era, same type of population. She would have lived somewhere like this. And then she moved to somewhere like this. This was Tehran in the late Qajar era. And this is Shamsul Emare, by the way. Shamsul Emare is still there. And this is Nasser Khosrow Street. Looks pretty similar, honestly. This is, of course, one of the most busy parts of Tehran during the day. And that time, there's like two dudes. So she moves to Tehran. And even better, as I was digging through the Qajar photo archives for you guys, I found a photo of an elite woman. Excuse me. I found a photo of an elite woman traveling on horseback with a shade to prevent herself from getting hot. So one can only imagine this is what poor Zhale, our dear Zhale, would have looked like as she traveled from her hometown in Farahan all the way to Tehran as a 15-year-old. And this is the Tehran that she comes to know. Nakhshe Darul Khilafeh Tehran, the home of the Caliphate Tehran. This is north, east, southwest. These are neighborhoods that kind of don't exist. Sangelaj exists. Udlajan exists. Bazar exists. But Chale Meydan is called something else now. But these neighborhoods do exist. This is a version of the city overlaid with the streets. Now, it might look like a big city to you. But if you compare it to modern Tehran, it's actually kind of nothing, really. So it's just the historical core of Tehran. And this would have been Zhale's life. So if you overlay it onto modern Tehran, to give you guys an idea, I'm from literally right there. This is my neighborhood in Tehran. So the distance I'd have to travel from my neighborhood to her neighborhood is like bigger than the distance of her entire world. Cities were very small back then. Zhale lived a very unhappy life, as you can imagine. She had one kid named Hussein, who is known by his pen name, Pejman. He's the reason, bless his heart, we have her poetry. He discovered it after her death, and he decided to publish it, even though it makes his father and family generally look very bad. So kudos to him for making this treasure trove available to us. Unfortunately, the husband, Ali Murad, stopped caring for the marriage. I think they mutually probably didn't want to remain married anymore, and took his only son with him. And she returned to Farahan to live with her family, which was normal back then. And then eventually for 20 years, after 20 years of not seeing her son, I think her husband died of old age. And then her son came to live with her. So from age 27, From her son being 27 onward, they lived together, and then she died and he took care of her. And this was a pretty normal arrangement back then. There wasn't like a whole shared custody situation. It tended to be just the child just goes with one or the other. And divorce is pretty uncommon back then anyway. And it's even unlikely that they were literally legally divorced. It might just be that she went to live with her mother's family, which is a euphemism for a divorce back then. Even till this day, when spouses argue, it's not uncommon for the wife to go stay at her mother's house as a sign of like taking distance. To give you an idea of where she's from, this is the map of the province that she's from. I'm Aroki, but my family's from various places around Arok, and she's from Farahan, just north of Arok. Arok didn't really exist as a major city then. And this little red circle is this same thing, but just in the context of Iran. So it's not that big a distance to Tehran, actually. I actually mentioned this earlier. Sorry, preempted myself. But basically, Zhale and her husband, they didn't get along. All she had to do for fun is just to sit around and read and write, which only increases the mismatchness because she's just getting more and more information about how European women live and the rights they have access to and the life they have and feminism and modernity and freedom and development. And then she turns around and she has this like brutish military man who's illiterate basically as her partner. Another thing is that people then still operated with the Greco-Roman idea of love, many of them. They had the idea that loving women was just about like children and homemaking, and that true love was with boys. Believe it or not, we've gone into this in the Sadi classes. Too little time to go over too much material. But basically, pre-modern Greco-Roman notions of love were a man and a mentee, and women were just seen as like a person to put in a garbage bag inside a house to have kids. I hate to say it that way, but I hate to mince words to make people feel better. Like literally, it just was that. So you can imagine, again, mismatched notions. And we'll read at the end of the class, the one poem we'll read today, because we don't have time, but from next time, obviously, we'll be reading. I picked a poem that will show you her mindset regarding this situation exactly. Zhale died at a young age. We think of ages as being like lifespans as being very short. They were getting longer then. So she died younger than expected, probably lived with a broken heart. She lived only a few years into Reza Pahlavi's reign. She saw a change in dynasty, 2 world wars, a worldwide pandemic, British and Russian occupations, 2 famines, and a rapid modernization of Iran, which I'm sure she welcomed that last part. Divorce, all kinds of personal trauma. So we're going to see a vision into that. She talks about all that stuff, believe it or not. And thank God that her son, Pejman, had the heart, had the honesty, had the courage, really, in an honor in a shame-based society that we call Iran. He had the courage to publish his mother's work because he believed in her voice and he believed in Iranian women's voice more than he feared his own family's dishonorment. So kudos to someone like him. He's passed away. I found his grave in Behzara. I'm going to go photograph her grave when I go to Arak and photograph his grave and say prayer. Seriously, if it wasn't for him, for all we know, he could have found her poetry because that's what happened. He discovered her poetry hidden, and he could have just said, you know what, this poetry makes my father and my family look awful. We're just going to put it in the closet. He did the courageous thing and published it, so kudos to him. About her poetry, although we'll see, it's classical in form and diction. So when you read the vocab and you look at the lines, it looks like historical poetry. It looks like Rumi's, Hafez's, whoever's. But the themes, voice, and ideas are modern, as you'll come to appreciate. And the audience, unfortunately, is unclear. She doesn't really use a pen name, which makes it seem like they're personal reflections, not meant to be read by others, which is why people have called her the Emily Dickinson of Persian poetry, like a recluse type of person with a tragic life who dies and her poetry is discovered. You can see the connection. And how complete it is unclear. I haven't been able to get to the bottom of the fact that in the divan, so this is a bilingual, but even in the original Persian, many poems have these 3 dots, these dots, that indicate lines are missing or a shift in theme that's unclear. And I don't know if that's because her son removed something or because he couldn't tell what was going on or he couldn't tell which pages were the first and second and third part of the poem. So unfortunately, that's a little unclear to us. And it's also unclear how good he was at editing the poems. We don't know if his own editorial judgment edited anything. We'll just have to suspend judgment. One of the scholars who studies Zhale made a good point. He said that the fact that he published the poems themselves in the state that they are shows that he wasn't having the mindset of, oh, I'm like protecting my family honor. So I think it's fair to say that he didn't like remove things that make the family look bad, so to speak. So I don't think we're dealing with the censorship issue. Just simply things get lost when there's no mindset of, oh, I'm going to publish my work. Who knows? Maybe she destroyed poems that she didn't like, or maybe she lost them. So Two good books to look at. One is less serious. One is serious about her life, the women's life at the time, is The Customs and Manners of the Women of Persia. This is about 150 years before her, and it has a little bit of a more jester tone to it. It's a little bit more kind of comical. It's a translation from a Persian book, but it will still show you what women's life was like then. Both of these are available as PDFs. And the other one is a very interesting book. It starts with a tract called The Education of Women, which, again, from our point of view, would look very misogynist, which is basically a book written by a man to men for how to raise daughters to be like proper Muslim daughters. And then a feminist, an early feminist at the time, responded to it with a tract called The Vices of Men. So this book starts with a tract that, again, is very chauvinistic seeming about how to raise a good, obedient daughter. And then it responds, or the next section is a tract written by an early feminist like Zhale, basically mocking men and making common Muslim discourse. Oh, men are this, women are that type of thing. But again, nonetheless, it illuminates the type of life they were living, the situation they had. The edition of the Divan we're going to be reading from is as such. If you don't care, this information isn't interesting to you. But for those edition nerds, this is it. And this is a translation that exists. I don't use the translations in this book, with all due respect to the man who compiled it. I just prefer to do my own and have my own notes. But if you're interested, this book is also a good resource nonetheless. Now today, we'll just start with reading one poem. If any of you are interested in reading from the Persian, let me know in the comments and I'll call on you. But I'll start by reading the first couplet in Persian, and it will show you, it'll point to a little note that I said about Greco-Roman love and modern love. So Zhale laments the fact that she never experienced true love in her life, that she married a man who was forged in the early 1800s and the mindset of women are for reproduction and boys are for love. So she says, من عاشق عشق بودم افسوس بی عشق حیات من تبه شد. I was in love with love itself, but alas, afsus, without love, my life was ruined. It was darkened. So I was in love with the idea of experiencing love, but my life was darkened. I never experienced it. I lived and died without having felt it. Josefa, great. Please go ahead.
در دل شرری ز آرزو بود کان هم ز سرشک غم سیه شد.
در دل شرری ز آرزو بود کان هم ز سرشک غم سیه شد. But still in my heart there was a spark of hope that maybe I would experience it. But even that spark from my sad tears was blackened. It was turned into ash, effectively, unfortunately. Yeah, of course. Please, and please introduce yourself, say your name, and read it for us.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I am Jahongir from Bukhara, Uzbekistan.
Welcome.
I'm really interested in reading this Persian poetry, so it's a good
I'm
chance
so
for me.
glad. I'm so glad.
So let me read it. هم بخت ندیدم کجنوا بود هم مرگ رفیقی نیمه ره شد.
هم بخت ندیدم کجنوا بود هم مرگ رفیق نیمه ره شد. I didn't see luck even. I saw no fortune. It had a crooked music is literally what she's saying, or it played crooked. It played the wrong notes. هم مرگ رفیق نیمه ره شد. Even death was a halfway friend or a fair weather friend. Even death was not a دوست مخلص, a sincere friend to me. Even death wouldn't come and just relieve me. Even death turned its back on me. All right, would anyone like to read the last one? I know there's a few readers in here who come to the Rumi class. If not, I'll read it. Go ahead, Lena, if you'd like.
Go ahead. Okay.
Go, please.
چندان به زمانه دیر ماندم تا مقنعه بر سرم کلاه شد. The hat کلاه شد.
کلاه. تا چندان به زمان دیر ماندم تا مقنعه بر سرم کلاه شد. Now this line is so interesting, so fascinating. And all the translations I found from it were totally wrong. And it took me like 20 minutes of thinking and researching and just jogging my mind until I realized what she meant. And this shows the importance of studying these people and really giving it the due time, because she's making a very subtle point about the change in women's life. People mistranslated this as like crown or hat, but it has a very particular meaning. I lingered in the age for so long that the veil on my head became a hat. I lingered so long in this age, meaning I hoped to die, but I lived so long, even though she only lived 63 years, that the veil on my head became a hat. Can anyone guess what she means by that? She says, I lived so long in this age that the veil on my head became a hat. What does that mean? The photo should have some of the answer for you.
She doesn't remove the veil, it stays there.
Not necessarily. That is getting there.
I
So
think
she's... Go ahead.
Sorry, I thought it's because of modernization that they just started, they switched out the veil, the chador.
Yes.
It
So-
became a uniform for her.
Exactly. So Reza Shah wanted to remove veils, but Iranian women were still embarrassed to show their hair. So they were so embarrassed. It's kind of like, I know some hijabi women who want to remove the hijab, but they're so embarrassed, so they wear like a hat or they wear like a bandana. They do something to silk because it just feels wrong. So Iranian women, they still felt wrong to come out with a veil. So this is Reza Shah's daughters being unveiled. They would all wear hats, like men's hats. So this is like a fedora, like what a Reddit atheist meme guy would wear, like an Orthodox Jew maybe would wear, but women are wearing it. So if you watch the show Shahzad, they actually do a good job of showing this. And some American friends or Iranian Americans said, oh, isn't it a shame that they can't show them with no veil? They have to put like a stupid hat because of the Islamic Republic's rules. But I said, no, that's actually not the deal. The deal is that women, they started just putting their hair in like a bun and just wearing like a hat over it because they were so uncomfortable. They still wanted to cover their hair. So she lived through this shift. She grew up wearing like a face veil and a burqa type of look, marnae. And then eventually she started wearing a hat. So she says, I lived so long in this life that I changed the veil of my head into like a hat. So again, a very small niche, subtle reference to the change in fortune or in life and fashion of Iranian women.
Like that's a reference of time.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
She lived through such intense changes, which is another reason she's such a fascinating person to read. So I hope that in the next now 9 weeks, we will dig into her life, understand women's lives, Qajar, Persia, the changes, the emotional state of people living in those traumatic times. Maybe it will help us relate to our ancestors and see we're not alone. Iran has been in a rough time for a long time. So I'm glad that you guys have chosen to join us. Thank you for those who volunteer to read. And I hope to see you guys all every week from now on, Sunday at 4 o'clock. The time won't be changing. The schedule won't be changing. The Zoom link won't be changing. And see you guys soon, inshallah.